Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about some more of the opening campaigns in the different theatres during the Civil War. We're going to begin with the very far west with what's called the Trans-Mississippi region. The theatres of war that were west of the Mississippi. We often don't think about these, but they were actually some pretty important conflicts. The most brutal one is the conflict between Kansas and Missouri, which continues. Remember, this goes all the way back into the 1850s. Ongoing, often very violent guerrilla warfare between pro-slavery or pro-secession and pro-federal or anti-slavery forces, and many people being killed. There's a Confederate effort to expand west from Texas and to capture New Mexico, and for a brief period they even gain control of Santa Fe, but then they are driven out and this Confederate effort fails. The Indian nations, mostly found in Oklahoma, fight on both sides in this conflict. We find more Native Americans fighting for the Confederacy, but both sides had Native American allies in the region that's west of the Mississippi. When we come to the Mississippi Valley itself, we find that the Union is acquiring a new military hero, and this military hero is a general named Ulysses Grant, who had fought in the Mexican-American War, but had then struggled with alcoholism, fallen on hard times. The war gives him a new purpose. Again, kind of like Lincoln, Grant is not someone who is an abolitionist, though Lincoln's going to become an abolitionist. But for Grant, this is about being whether you're loyal to the United States or whether you are a traitor. And so that's the inspiration for him to join the war and to lead troops in the Mississippi Valley. And he's extremely successful in capturing forts in the Mississippi Valley and eventually capturing the city of Nashville. And these campaigns ensure that Kentucky will remain in the control of the Union. And this is really important. Remember how worried Lincoln was that Kentucky would secede, that then it would be very difficult to keep the North united or to keep New England united with the Midwest. Grant's campaigns mean that Lincoln doesn't have that worry anymore. The Confederates tried to regain the initiative in the Mississippi Valley by attacking the Union Army at the Battle of Shiloh. And although they're initially successful, in the end they're thrown back. What's perhaps two things that are notable about the Battle of Shiloh? Three things that are notable about the Battle of Shiloh. One, it means that the Confederacy will always struggle to retain control of the Mississippi River, which is crucial because 3 of the 11 states of the Confederacy that provide important sources of manpower and supplies, Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, are west of the Mississippi. They have to keep connections between east and west of the Mississippi open. So it means that those are going to be under threat because they haven't been able to drive the federal forces back. Battle of Shiloh is notable for the emergence of another very capable general fighting for the North, William Sherman. This is the point where his talents begin to be recognized. And the third is the huge number of casualties, 25,000 casualties, more than double the number of American casualties in the American Revolutionary War alone. And it shows just how destructive war has become by the middle of the 19th century. We'll talk about this more, but the Civil War is seen as the first modern war. It's a war where armies are transported more quickly, more men are transported through railroads and steamboats. The weapons have become that much more advanced, war has become that much more impersonal and that much more deadly, and medicine has not kept up. And so you have modern military technology and much earlier medicinal approaches. Amputation was a standard practice for a wound to the limb. Those who had stomach wounds almost always died. Of all the thousands of casualties and deaths during the American Civil War, 40% of them are going to be people who died of their wounds because medical care had not kept up with the destructiveness of war. So that's the third important aspect of the Battle of Shiloh to keep in mind, that the Civil War is going to be an extremely destructive war. So that's the West. Union side, Northern side, the Federal side is being successful. In the East, the Confederacy is being much more successful. Lincoln had found a general named George McClellan, who was a great organizer, who had organized the Army of the Potomac, the main Union army that's fighting in the East. And McClellan had put together a good army, but was cautious in how he used it. And this led to him being defeated several times by the greatest general of the Confederacy, Robert E. Lee, who has fewer resources than McClellan, but is daring and aggressive in how he uses them. And Lee beats McClellan in a couple of battles. He even invades Maryland and fights McClellan in Maryland. This is called the Battle of Antietam. It's technically a draw, but it's a sign of how aggressive Lee is being with the Confederate Army. It's a sign of how timid and the extent to which the Federal Army is underperforming. That even with the manpower and the industrial resources that the North had, they're kind of fighting a little bit on the defensive. Nevertheless, Lincoln uses what was a draw, but Lincoln saw it as a victory, or presented it as a victory, because the Confederates had been repulsed, to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And this is a political reframing of the war that changes the way the war will be viewed. Lincoln, as you remember, early in the war, when he's trying to keep the border states in the Union, was very nervous about using the rhetoric of this is a war to free the slaves. He emphasized this is a war to save the Union, or to return rebel states to the Union. But over the first years of the war, he starts to see that removing the slaves from the South would be a really important way of damaging the Southern war effort. And so he issues this proclamation at the beginning of 1863 as a war measure. He still does not free the slaves in states like Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri that have remained loyal to the Union. Lincoln argued that he did not have the authority to end slavery in these states, that only Congress could do that. But it declared that as a war measure, slaves who fled from their masters in the South, who reached the Union lines, would not be returned. This creates some confusion in the South. That's partly what Lincoln's looking for. But more significantly, in the North and in Europe, it reframes this conflict not as a war of Union, or even from Southern eyes as a war of conquest, but it reframes it as a war, as a crusade, even as a holy war to free the slaves. And this is really important for the success of the North. It means that European nations are much more uneasy about allying with the South. It means that more people in the North are more committed to the cause of the war that Lincoln is promoting.